Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm never sure whether people actually want to watch these types of videos where someone makes a beat from scratch, going through their processes, all that kind of stuff, endlessly scrolling through samples and menus, all that kind of thing. But I did do a quick poll on my channel and it seems that you guys do actually enjoy watching these kinds of videos. So here I am. Let's jump in. So before we get deeply into it, I just want to clarify a few things. Firstly, this is going to be a very informal type kind of thing, very loose. It's not scripted. I've got a few key points that I'll talk about. It's not going to be a completely in-depth start to finish video. That would take hours, and I want to try and condense this into around about an hour if possible. I will split it into relevant chapters when I edit it. And this is more going to be a video about my techniques, my thought processes, and my workflow when I'm writing. I will go into some mixing stuff and some advanced workflow, obviously. But what I won't be doing is I won't be doing basic MPC stuff. I'll assume that you do know your basics when it comes to the MPC and production. If not, there's a ton of videos about, in-depth things about how to sample, how to chop, that kind of thing. In fact, I've even done a few myself. I was asked in the poll if I could explain everything I was doing and why, even if it seems irrelevant. So I will try and do that, but do excuse me if I ramble. I will try and keep things fairly in order and not jump around. And if there are menus that I am going to be endlessly scrolling through, or it does get a bit complicated, the sample I'm chopping up, etc., I probably will edit it just to make it a bit shorter so you're not bored. I won't even do that speeded up 30 seconds thing, which people do in their videos because it's pointless. It's 30 seconds of sped up video that no one's going to watch. So yeah, like I said, it's going to be very loose, very laid back. It's not going to be...
Here is me making a beat. Here is me chopping a beat.
It's just going to be sort of the ramblings of me and the processes that I go through. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some samples. I want to kind of make this a bit more real world rather than just... random rhythm roulette type sort of thing. So I'm actually working on a kind of lo-fi hip hop instrumental album at the moment. I've been working on it for quite a few years now. I just kind of go back to it every now and then. So I have a folder that I've been putting ideas in over the years. Now, something I learned very, very quickly when I first started crate digging back in 1983, 84, 83. Was when I first started collecting beats and samples, that kind of thing. I learned very quickly that you need to stay organized. And how I used to do it is if I found a sample, I would have, like, my records would be organized in such a way that that was my group of records that I was working on at the moment. They were my sample records. Those were my open breaks records. Those were my a cappella records. So right from the very start, I was organized like that. And then obviously when I got my SP1200 and MPC 60, S950, late 80s, early 90s, I started organizing it in discs. And then as the digital age grew and grew, since about 2005, I've been keeping everything in monthly folders. So I have, let's say for instance, August 2024, I have a general folder, I have a open breaks folder, I have an acapellas folder, and then I have a stabs and rolls sound effects folder. So everything that I dig that month will go into those folders, and then I keep them in a big, on a couple of hard drives that I can take with me anywhere. So if I've got my Live 2 and I go away, or if I've got one of the copies of them plugged in here, I've got a couple, make sure you keep backups. So basically I have a 5 terabyte drive that I can take anywhere, which constantly has ideas on it. Now the way that I do things is I've always had listening sessions and then work sessions, or what I consider to be work when I'm writing. So I will have sessions where I'm just crate digging, just listening to tracks. I mean, I'm constantly doing it. I must go through, I reckon even on my days off, about an hour to 2 hours a day at least, I'm crate digging. And I have been doing that for 40 years. And I'm constantly listening out for stuff. Even when my wife plays Spotify, I'll hear a track. She's really into like disco, early 80s, boogie, that kind of stuff. So I'll hear something and I'll go, there's a loop there. I'm just constantly listening out for loops. So So I've got a folder here that I've been just sort of kind of building up over the last couple of years working with this album. So rather than it be a rhythm roulette style thing, I am actually going to look at something that I might then go on to finish as an actual track. What we're going to do today is I'm going to find like a beat, an open break, and I'm going to find a basic sample to work on. We'll chop them up, chop up the beats, and we'll go into that in a bit more depth. And then I'll do some sort of basic mixing and basic preparation work that I would do in the MPC. Then I bounce it into my DAW, which we won't go into today. So we're going to listen through some beats, etc. Let's have a quick listen through some stuff here, see if we can find something that stands out today. Let's have a listen. It's a bit disco-y for today, I think.
They give way.
Okay, not really feeling that today. Can hear the crackles on that. A lot of these are old transfers where I went over a couple of years. I bounced all of my vinyl onto digital, so that I'd be able to carry them around with me, rather than 3 million records. That's so dope, that sample. But I am actually kind of working on something with that already, so I'll leave that one for today. Obviously DJ Shadow used that beginning part, so I'm not even going to play that. So that's the original break that Shadow sampled on his first album, I think it was, Introducing. Let's have a listen to this. Some weird late 70s. Okay, that's nice as well. What have we got here in this folder? Oh yeah, I'm liking that. I'm feeling that. Okay, let's go with that. Let's just get a sound level. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Okay, so I think we've got enough there. There's a few little bits in there I can hear. There's a bit later on which doesn't have the guitar solo and it just does a rhythm, so I could have it as a backing. So something else I do right from the very, very start is name things. I tend to date them as well. 240815. OG, but that's because that's the original sample. And I always take the initial chunk and I save that in the project folder, so I've got it to go back as reference anytime I want. Again, it's just keeping organised. And we'll keep that. And that I did actually already have a beat that I wanted to use, which is too fast for this, but I want to slow it down anyway, to be honest. See, this is what happens when you dig multiple genres. That is a about 67, 68 surf pop record. It's on the B side. I think it's been sampled. I think Peanut Butter Wolf, possibly Shadow, someone like that has actually sampled it already. But the way that I'm going to cut it up with open beats, it's a little bit different. You know, with a major sample, it's so obvious that somebody else has sampled it. Like, say, for instance, Today by Tom Scott, which Pete Rock used on They Reminisce Over You. There's just that saxophone part, as much as I love it, and it goes in my sampler. It's gone in my sampler so many times. There's just no point, because it's just that Pete Rock track. So there's just no point. But with the open breaks, you can chop them up in a different way. It's a lot easier to just take individual sounds or rearrange it, etc. So I'm not that bothered that that's been sampled. But I do also know that it's super rare, and I don't think it's been sampled on many things. It's certainly not, you know, a substitution or Impeach the President or Funky Drummer or something like that. It's not instantly recognizable. So I'm quite happy with that. With samples and stuff, what I do quite often do is, if I find something that I really are thinking about using seriously and, you know, going to be looking to release it, I'll do a bit of research on who sampled, see if somebody else has sampled it, see what record label or what publishing company owns the publishing. Just looking forward, you know, because if you're going to have to clear it, who you're going to need to speak to, you know, if you're really seriously thinking about releasing your own stuff. I'm not talking about doing beats for other people, because if beats for other people, you do have to be really careful on samples, because obviously their label is going to be, well, what's that sampled off? But if you're releasing your own stuff like I do, and you just want to lay the grounds, you just want to, you know, look at the bigger picture and think further down the line, am I going to need to clear this with Universal Publishing, etc. You know, you need to just do a little bit of research. And, you know, the thing that's most important to me, as certainly starting out as a hip hop producer, and that's carried through into my house productions, right from the very, very start, it was all about, has somebody else used it? You know, and if somebody else has used it and it's super obvious, then I tend to steer away from it, even if I love the sample. There's just no point. Again, going back to Today, Tom Scott, there's no way in a million years that I would make a better record than They Reminisce Over You. It would just never happen. So what's the point? And this is in my mind. There's no right or wrong here. You know, if you want to sample that sample, go for it. But just for me, it just sort of seems a lot of effort to, you know, you want to strive to try and do something at least different, or if not better. So if you do use samples that somebody else has used, me personally, I want to do something better or very, very different. Excuse me. So anyway, with that beat, like I said, I'm pretty certain it has been sampled, but it's not a major big deal for me because it's not completely obvious. Okay, so now I've got my samples, I'm going to start thinking about chopping them up and doing the little bits of processing that I might need to do. We're going to start with the original loop. Now, first things first, I'd look at that and I just say to myself, actually, before we go any further, just let me make absolutely certain that everything's working on here. Okay, yes, it is, that's fine. So, yeah, looking at that straight away, I can see that it's going to need normalizing, so I'll go in and normalize it. Secondly, listening to the sample. There's a lot going on in the stereo field, and because of the type of music I'm making, I want to keep this dead down the center, but I also want everything that's in there to be in there. There's a guitar over here, there's some, sounds like maybe a Rhodes over there. So I'm going to centralize everything. So I've still got my original loops. I can always go back to that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sum this. And okay. Now I've got that summed loop right down the middle. Okay, now another thing that I tend to do, especially if I'm thinking about what genre I'm going to be working on, so I'm going to bit reduce that. So now the sum is 12-bit. Well, it's Akai's version of 12-bit. So it just adds a little bit more grit to the sample and a little bit more depth and a tiny little bit of low end as well if you play them next to each other. So I have my cue links here when I chop. I have actually made a video about it. Reason is because then I can use this cue link to zoom in and out, which I like to do. And then I use the data wheel to zoom in on the parts that I want to use. So I'm going to chop this up into different sections, and then once I've got it into different sections, we'll go from that point. Okay, so getting into my chopping, what I tend to do is I listen to the sample all the way through, and I'll pick out some parts which I might want to use that sound, in my head I can hear the loops already. As I said earlier on, it's just something that I do when I listen to music. I just listen for loops. So there's a couple of bits in this that I quite fancy using. There's a kind of bridge part, but initially I'm looking for a main sample. And I don't really want the guitar solo, the guitar playing the melody. I just kind of want a backing part. So make sure you're in zero snap. Okay, I just want to... Okay, what I was doing there with the slow down thing is it's an old school thing that you used to have to do on things like an SP1200 because you didn't have a visual reference. I don't really like using visual references. I like to do a feel of a vibe. So quite often I will find, I'll be on what I need to be on so I can adjust the end here, and then I'll shut my eyes and when you slow it down, you can hear if there's a tiny bit of space before the transient that you want to start the sample on. It's a really old school thing. So I still do it now, even though I have a visual reference. I don't always trust the visual reference, and also I don't trust the zero snap. So you can hear a lot better if there's clicks or pops, or you're not at zero crossing, or it doesn't quite sound right if you slow it right down. So that's another old school technique. Again, I've included that in a video that I've made before. So what I've done now is I've set up a loop, and what I'm going to do now is if you hit this top one here, it will loop it for you, and then you can adjust the end or the start to get the loop right. But again, I don't want to really trust the visual. I want to listen to it, because the drummer's not always going to be playing on time, or the guitarist or the bass player or whatever. They're not going to be nailed on. So if I was to cut that, if I was to find out exactly what the BPM is, which would be variable anyway, and then cut exactly 4 bars, it might not be on. Or I might want it to be a little bit earlier, or I might want it to be a little bit late. See, that's not quite spot on. If I zoom in on the end there, I probably would go that way a little bit, but I kind of like the way that sounds, and I'm feeling that although there is a little bit of a, not a glitch is the wrong word, there's a little bit of a bump, I suppose. I like the way that it feels. See, the guitarist and the bass player are very, very slightly late, and they're kind of dragging a little bit. So the fact that the sample loops in that way as well, it's kind of got a lazy feel to it. So I like that. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that loop as it is. Yep. So I'm going to process this, and if we go into extract, I'm going to call that the main. Okay, and let's just come out again and come back here. So that I'm thinking of as being like kind of a bridge part, just to sort of change things up a little bit so that it's not just a 4-bar loop all the way through. Let's have another listen to this. Okay, that's now got that same late kind of feeling again. When it was this way a little bit, it was a bit too late, but I still want a little bit of lateness in the loop just because of the laziness of the way that the guitar's playing, and it's got that sort of lazy groove. So we'll extract that one as well. And then finally, I think I'm just going to take this beginning part, I think. Yeah, you see, the first time it went round, it didn't quite sound right to me. Now this time round, if I use visual reference there, that to me would say that's not going to be right, it needs to be there. But when it was there, it didn't sound quite right. And again, this isn't perfect, but it fits with the groove. And I also know from experience that this type of loop, there's a lot of instruments sustained in there. Strings, pads, a Rhodes or a piano when you press the pedal down so you have sustain on it, crash cymbals, anything like that that have a lot of sustain on it. They're going to be difficult to chop up and it not sound jutty, you know, kind of thing. There are little tricks that you can use to stop that kind of glitchy sound. So I'm listening to this in advance and I'm thinking that there's probably not going to be a lot of chopping going up here, to be honest. There's no drums in it, so it's not going to have to be super tight when I put it over a drum beat. The drum beat I want to get nice and tight, but the actual sample, I kind of like the fact that it's a bit loose and it's kind of, you know, variable. It's not super tight. So I might tighten it up in some certain places, like maybe here and here, depending on how it sounds. But again, if you listen to it, because there's a lot of sustained instruments, just from my experience, I know that this is going to be tough to chop up, and it not sound rubbish. And I want to keep that natural vibe. I don't really want it to sound chopped up. Yeah, so you can hear there's quite transients there of the guitar playing, and it's with a bass as well. So there and there. If I do need to chop them up at any point, that's probably where I will chop them up. Let's just take that back. Loop 1, and we'll call that guitar, but we'll spell it correctly. Okay, so now I'm going to chop up the beat. I'm not going to go into massive detail on this. You've all seen videos of chopping things up, but what I am going to explain on this beat is there's stabs in this beat, and then there's areas where there's just the drums. Now I'm not going to be looping this drum beat. I'm going to be taking certain elements of it, and again, I'm also not going to be taking individual sounds as such. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take parts of the drum beat and rearrange how the drum beat is, and then possibly add some individual sounds that I've cut up over the top with it as well. And the reason, this is something that I really love doing. One of my favourite people that does this is Damu the Fudge Monk. Listen to Damu. He takes really, really well-known, obvious open breaks, Impeach the President, Funky Drummer, Sweet Pea, Tommy Rowe, you know, really classic, well-known b-boy breaks. So you'll recognise them when you hear it, but you'll be thinking, no, that's not how the beat goes. So rather than chop it up into individual sounds or chop it up into quarters or eighths, so it's, you know, it's obvious, he will take certain elements and he will rearrange it, chop it about, add in a few ghost kicks from the same break, add in a few ghost snares from the same break, maybe take the hi-hat and change the way that the hi-hat plays. So it's almost like there's an undiscovered section of that record that the drummer played it differently and nobody's heard it. So you keep that familiarity, but you also rearrange the break in such a way that it's not how everyone else used it. And that's what I was going on about earlier on, that I'm not that bothered that this beat has been used before, because the way that I'm going to chop it up is not going to be the same. So it's still going to keep that familiarity. There are going to be people that go, oh yeah, that's Shadow or whoever it was, Peanut Butter Wolf, and they're going to hear it, they're going to know the sounds, but it's not going to be the break that they're used to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly run through this. And I'm basically going to cut out the stabs, the dun and the stab right at the start, and then just chop it up into a drum beat that is basically the drum beat without any stabs. It's not going to sound like a proper finished drum beat, but once I've chopped it up, you'll see what I mean. So just bear in mind that that's what I'm going to do, chop out the stabs. Okay, whilst I'm not going to go through the entire chop on this because it will take too long, what I am going to do though quickly is explain what I'm going to be doing. Like I said, I'm cutting out the stabs. So if you zoom in on where the stabs are, so in that section there is the stab that I'm not going to want in the beat. So if basically I'm going to go through it. Incidentally, I normalized it and monoed it and 12-bitted it the same as well. So process, and if I then go into, never remember where it is, delete, there you go. That will now delete the start and end area that I've highlighted. Okay, so now if I play this sample from the start, see, I've taken the stab out. Like I said, it doesn't sound perfect. But what I'm doing is breaking this down, so I've got one sample with just the beats in it and the stabs out of it. Then I can start chopping up into the parts that I want to chop it into. Okay, so I've cut all the stabs out now, and now I have a long drum beat, which is just open beats, and now I can start extracting my ones, twos, my snares, my hats, etc., etc. Individual instruments, also little bits cut together. So this is just it played all the way through with the stabs taken out. Like I said, again, it doesn't sound factually correct as a drum beat, as a loop, but I have all my parts in one chunk without the stabs. It's a bit of a long way round to do things, but it's just, I like to keep things organised. I didn't want those stabs in there, and I just really wanted these particular parts, so I just keep them all together as one sample. So there's the sample in one go. Okay, so what I very quickly did as well is I saved my project, named the programs that I'm going to be using, just again to keep everything organized right from the very start. So in that project folder, I have the name of the project, obviously, the sequence, the programs, all the original loops, all my original material, and now each time I just have to hit Shift Save on here and it's going to save my project. It's all named, it's all organized. I also keep my on my disk, my external SD card, I keep things very organized on there. So in my MPC projects, for instance, they're dated month-wise. So this month, this is the track that I'm working on now. It's a YouTube MPC, Make a Beat One, Lo-Fi Hip Hop. Genres just, I don't always do that, but it just helps. And as I'm going to be doing multiple maker beats with house music, disco house, hip hop, etc., I just found it might be easier if I named the genre. Don't always do it, but just the more information that you can put in the project if you're working on a sketch, the better it's going to be, because it's going to give you an idea of what you know, when you're scanning through, it just identifies it a bit better, so you're not loading projects and go, oh, that was the wrong one, etc. Dating for me as well is obviously really good, because it keeps things in order, so you know roughly when you don't know roughly when you worked on it, you know exactly when you worked on it because it's dated. Just something that I've done for a long time. Okay, so first things first, with the getting things in time, etc. Okay, so I've got my two different programs, my beat. You can hear that I've chopped that up into tiny little pieces, but not just individual sounds. You know, 1/2s, quarters, eighths, etc. And then with the loops, at the moment they're just as they are, 4-bar loops. So just quickly, I chucked in the main loop, which I want to use just on A1, just as a 4-bar loop, and got that in time. 95 BPM is a nice tempo to work at for this kind of stuff, but you know, there's no right or wrong here or anything. So you can just hear that I've got this original loop. Okay, just to kind of get me into a bit of a groove and stuff, what I quite often will do is at this point I will start adding some compression and some vibe, etc., to the actual sounds, the loops. And first things first, almost all the time I will put MPC 60 on the end. So let's select that. And then the first one, I want to maybe add a bit of compression. Let's go for the vintage. Nice rule. Home in on the attack in a second. We'll keep the release quite short, and the threshold will take the ratio up a little bit as well. So what I'm doing there really is leveling things out, but not too much. creating a little bit of breathing with the short release and pushing the ratio up a little bit higher, taking the threshold down a little bit. I want the transients of the guitar and bass to come through, but I have rounded them off a little bit by shortening the attack. Normally I'd probably run the attack a little bit longer than that. But using the compression in this situation, I want to create a bit of vibe to it, but I also want to get some control over it and start thinking about shaping the sounds. With compressors, and I've done a video on it, and there's countless other videos on it, but the correct, no, actually, I'm not going to say the correct. The way that I tend to think of compressors in a situation like this is a shaping tool. Compressors can be used to get levels right. Compressors can be used to have creative pumping effects. Compressors can be used as a shaping tool, and that's how I'm using this. I want to shape the transients and shape the sustain, get the levels where I want them to be. The vintage is really nice for that with samples. It's very organic, and it does imprint a sound. You know, it's not a transparent compressor. If I wanted a transparent compressor, I'd probably use the air compressor, but I actually do want to vibe with this. It's kind of like the Fairchild. I think that's what it's based on. Fairly certain that's what it's based on. Again, I do go into more depth on one of my videos, which compressor in the MPC. But yeah, like I said, I want to create a bit of a vibe here with this. Let's just add a bit of EQ. Now, let's have a go at... we'll use the Para EQ. I think it's probably the best bit here. Okay, very, very subtle. I'm not even sure you're going to hear it on YouTube, but I've just brought out the low end a little bit. I've cut some mud around about 200 hertz. I'm just going to home in on that in a second. I've added a little bit of clarity at 4K, between 4 and 5K, and there's a high shelf, so I've just brought the highs up a little bit. But it is very, very subtle. It's just a broad stroke EQ. It's not surgical, because I'm EQing an entire band as such. You know, there's guitar in there, there's bass, there's vibes or Rhodes in there. So there's no, you know, being surgical is good if I want to cut out some frequency. So I might go a little bit more surgical on the attenuation here with the mids, the low mids, 200 hertz, just to get rid of a little bit of mud. I'm just trying to tighten and tidy up the bass just a little bit here. Feel how much low end the MPC 60 adds. Okay, so let's add a little bit more vibe to it, and we'll use something like Airflavor Pro. Yeah, let's try Airflavor Pro. Let's let it load up. Wow, I'd love some more RAM. Okay, here we go. Now I don't really want to use any of their... Okay, so I have my own initial preset that I saved, and basically I zeroed everything in Airflavor Pro and then saved it as my own initialization preset. As you can see here, Crates Motel in it. So if I load that in now, I now have Airflavor Pro. On complete bypass. I don't know why Akai haven't included just a straight initialization one, and they do this on a lot of their EQs, etc, etc. You just want to be able to turn it on and have just a flat clean slate. I do get the whole presets thing, it's really, really good, but for something like Airflavor Pro that's so in depth, if you load it up and you've straight away got a preset that's all over the place, you don't really know what's going on, you have no control over it. So as I said, I basically zeroed everything and then saved with the save thing here. In my own folder, I've got my own preset and it's done. So I do just want to add a little bit of flavor to this, just maybe some vinyl sound. Yeah, let's just do some vinyl sound on there. Yeah, okay, I like that. Let's just save that. When you're working on the MPC One, I can't talk for the X, the ones with more RAM, but when you're working on the MPC One and the Live 2, when you're working with something like Airflavor Pro, that can be a little bit sketchy. Regularly save, because sometimes, I mean, literally a second ago I changed a few things on Airflavor Pro and the screen just went blank and it just crashed. So bear that in mind. It's something that we have to put up with. It's been like that with MPCs since day one. My MPC 60 just used to freeze up sometimes for no reason. It's not a new thing, but introducing high processing into the equation, you're gonna, you're more likely to have crashes, etc. Airflavor Pro, for me, is not the most stable plugin, so I just get used to regularly saving. Regularly saving is something that you should do anyway. So, so I'm going to possibly add a little bit of distortion. Let's have a listen. Okay, it's added a little bit of saturation. There's a bit of a mid-range boost there, and I like that. It just kind of brings things out a little bit. Again, it's subtle. I don't want, super distortion on there or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of enrichen it, saturate it, bring it out a little bit, give it some more depth. And I like what I love the transform on this. It's very, very subtle. Concentrate on the acoustic guitar when I bring it in and out, and you'll hear that it just gives it a bit more clarity and a bit more depth. Actually, let's go into bypass first. The finger picking acoustic, listen to that. So a little bit of saturation there, and it just kind of brings it out in the mix just a little bit. Okay, so I've got that kind of where I want it to be as a rough kind of sketch start off. So now I'm going to start working on the beat. you know, the thing is about this whole process is it's quite long-winded. You know, I mean, sometimes things just fall together really, really quickly, and I like that. But because I'm having to explain as I go as well, obviously it's taking a bit longer. So I've got the loop kind of where I want it to be. I'm just going to stick working on that part of the loop first rather than the other parts that I've got. And now we'll just start building up a drum beat. Now, as I explained, rather than using the loop of that open break, I've chopped it up into parts, into quarters, into eighths, into the individual sounds, certain little bits that I like the sound of. And I'm now going to build a drum beat around that. But because I'm still keeping the little air bits between, when you have individual sounds, there's no air, there's no ambience. I want the room ambience. I want it to sound like its own beat, sound like it was drummed, it was a drummer making the beat in a room rather than it being chopped up into bits. So the reason why I like doing that, and again, like I said, if you want to listen to the master of that, Damu the Fudge Monk, he's an absolute master at it. So he will take, like I said, a well-known break beat and chop it up into individual sounds, but also into quarters, eighths, sixteenths, and keep the room ambience so it sounds like a proper drum beat, a proper break, rather than, you know, nothing wrong with that. But for a lot of the stuff that I do, I love my open breaks and I love room noise and I love ambience. And rather than have to try and add some myself, I like to try and keep the original capture from, you know, the dirty mic, the big room, the badly treated room that it was recorded in, and that for me gives it grit and proper, you know, that proper ambience. I love it, and I don't really want to take that away. But I do have the individual sounds as well. There you can hear it's chopped up into parts where I'm going to keep the original room ambience. So now it's just a matter of playing around and starting to build a drum beat. And these things you have to build. So, you know, you'll have... Let's go. Okay, let's just build a few things here. It's good to find a basis for the beat to start with. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of things going on here. So I kind of like that as the basis, using that, and maybe those two. Let's try those two first. Kind of like that one. Okay, so I've carried on building this beat and adding some. This part is really an essential part of the groove, having this on 16 levels. And you'll hear what I mean when I show you. But what I'm starting to notice now is that I'm going to have to change the timing. What's really nice about having these beats cut up into, rather than having it as single sounds, is you can, by changing the speed of the sample, you can start changing the swing of the sound. So at the moment, if you listen, it sounds a little bit like that, and it's not quite right. So I want to kind of smoothen things up a little bit. See, the magic part of that was adding that. The rest of it was building using these parts. But now if I start changing the actual length as such, actually if we do a little bit of tail length on here as well. So as an extreme example of that, if I drop do it as a semitone, you'll hear that it changes the swing of the beat because I've changed the length of the sample. See, on -2, the drummer's kind of playing on the 16s, but once I take it down to 3, he starts almost playing triplets, so it skips more. So, whereas on 2 it's on 2, but on 3 So for me, -3, but probably up a little bit. I don't want it to be skipping quite as much as that. So you can hear what I'm doing here is, in effect, I've chopped them up into the little parts that I've done, the quarters, the 16ths, the 8ths, etc., with individual sounds as well, adding little ghost parts. And now I've got my own breakbeat that I've made up myself, rather than it being do gut, it's sort of do you know what I mean? It's kind of got like a room ambience to it, a natural sound to it, an organic sound to it. And now with the speed, I can start shifting things and I can change the swing of it. So it's almost having your own breakbeat with ambience, with room sound, but being able to change the swing of it and still keeping that really organic sound. So if we just bring this back in again. Okay, so now what I want to start doing is adding some processing to the drums. And we're going to keep doing this in the mix, I think. So again, I want to add some compression, add a bit of vibe, perhaps not the, shall we try the vintage? Let's try the vintage, why not? This might add a real side of clanging. Now, bear in mind, I'm overdoing this here. I want to create a character of vibe. This isn't surgical compression where I'm trying to get things all in order and everything level. I want to add, let me try and think of an example of this. If you're familiar with ultramagnetic MCs, Give the Drummer Some, when the mix engineer mixed that, or it could have been Seji and the guys from Ultramagnetics that came up with the idea rather than the mix engineer. They've taken this particular drum loop and they've over compressed it. Probably a DBX 160, something like that, I would imagine, but they've injected loads of character to it. If you listen to the original break, when I first heard the original break, I was kind of like, I'm sure that's the beat from Give the Drummer Some by Ultramagnetics, but it's not breathing, it's not pumping, it's not moving, there's no groove to it, it's just dun gut, dun dun gut. But with the injection of the compression and adding the character and over compressing and making the room breathe and bringing up the floor, the noise floor, the ambience, it suddenly was going and it just really pumped and breathed. And you know, that doesn't work all the time, but when it does work, it sounds fat. And you know, I always use that as an example when I'm talking to students about bringing up the room sound, you know, really injecting a particular sound, a smack into a break. That is the one, that's the track. Ultramagnetics MCs Give the Drummer Some. So I'm going to try and create something similar to that. Let's just mute. Okay, again, to create a bit of pumping, I've got a shorter release. The attack, I'm kind of rounding the transits off a little bit. It was smacking a bit too much with a really super short release and a longer attack. I might adjust the knee in a second. The ratio is kind of high, not massively high, but kind of high, where I'd have it on a DBX 160 probably. Let's just bring the knee up. Okay, that's starting to sound like where I want it to sound. When I mix tracks down, I do tend to bounce them into a DAW, but I do like to get into a ballpark area. And also, you know, the drum beat, I know these are not level matched, so just to save you the bother of writing in the comments below, it's not level matched. I know it's not level matched. There's no way of doing that in the MPC easily. It's a bit of a pain in the arse. So, but I still, with my ears and the amount of time that I've been doing what I'm doing, I can make that adjustment to know what I'm doing with the sound when I add compression or EQ, and then I drop it into bypass again. So level match is really important, but if you don't have it, you need to train yourself to be able to distinguish between bypassed and the effect, so that you're not thinking, oh wow, louder is better. So I know what's going on. I can hear the transients, the sustain, how the levels have been changed, how the dynamic range has been changed with this compression. So I know it's not level matched, I do know that, but I do know the difference, is what I'm trying to say. I can hear that I've changed the dynamic range and I've brought the floor, the ambience in the room where the drummer was there, bringing it up. It's especially, that's the one that's really doing the magic. Now we'll add a little bit of EQ. Again, let's go with the para. Actually, no, let's not go with the para. Let's go with the PEQ4 band. Okay, it's quite broad stroke. I brought up some low end. I've cut out a bit of mud again, similar to the sample, and I have added a little bit of clarity at 5K. Very, very small amount actually, doesn't need a lot of work. And then just a little bit of sizzle on the snares, on the hi-hats, sorry. Again, because I'm treating it as a break beat rather than individual sounds, I wanted to do like an overall kind of sound to it. I would then, in the mix later on, go into individually EQing the snares, the kick, maybe a bit of low end on the kick, and just to be a bit more precision. So again, I want to add the MPC 60 on this. And then potentially a bus compressor here. Let's just have a listen. The snares were jumping out a little bit too much for me, but I still wanted, from the original compressor, the vintage compressor is what's making everything breathe and bringing up the noise floor. The bus compressor, after the EQ, very, very subtle, is just bringing everything into line a little bit, because the snares were jumping out a little bit too much for me. And so I've still kept the vibe, I've still kept the breathing, the reduction in the dynamic range, the bringing up of the noise floor, but now I've just reeled it in a little bit and I've got a little bit more control over it. As you can see, really, really subtle moves, and I've dialed back the wet a little bit. The threshold is really low. Bus compressor, you have to completely use your ears. There's no visual reference whatsoever. So just listen to how the snares are behaving without the compressor on, and then when I bring it in, it just locks them in a little bit. Okay, so now further things I'm thinking of doing is maybe I want to do a version of the main sample loop with just the low end playing, you know, the classic filter technique. So obviously I've used up all four here, so what do I do? So if you go into track mix, what I've basically done is in my programs, this is my program here. Into my routing, I've just recently done a video on this actually. It was on Out 1.2, which is on by default in the MPC One. So what I've done is I've sent the entire program to sub 1, and then in my subs on submix 1 I've added the air filter. So now I've got everything for the program going into sub 1, and I can now use a filter. So like I said, all my 4 effects were taken up. I needed another effect because I want to use the filter. So obviously this is still at a very, very simple stage. I've really just got the original loop and I've made up the drum beat, chopped it up, like I said, recreated my own break beat. But it's, you know, it's a basis for moving further on. And, you know, in the other loop, the other loop that I've got with the guitar playing like a melody over the top, and I've got that bridge part as well. So now I can start thinking about building things, arrangement. Now that's something that, you know, how long is a piece of string? That can take 15 minutes, that can take 5-6 hours, that can take days. So I'm not going to really go into that too much. Really, I wanted to just kind of show you how what my workflow is if I'm working on a track like this, you know, finding the loop, building a drum beat around it. And, you know, sometimes I don't always do it that way. Sometimes I might, you know, quite happily just write drum beats like that all day, to be honest. In fact, I've got libraries full of beats that I've made like that, and then I can just drag them up if ever I need them. Good thing about another thing is when you build up a drum beat like this, I can bounce that to just its own sample now. So I've got that beat on its own, and, you know, you can smash out, you know, beat tapes. You can just send out open breaks to people, other producers. It's really, really handy for that. You know, sometimes when I'm bored, or sometimes if I've not got that creative thing where I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to take a loop, I'm going to put a drum beat over it, then I'm going to add some vocals, I will just sit for hours just making up, you know, chopping up original breaks, open breaks, chopping them up into pieces like I've done on this video, and making up my own beats. You know, and that's a video in itself. Just I'm happy with that, actually, because it's got real swing, it's got tightness, it's got a groove still, it's got looseness. It's exactly what I envisaged in my head from that beat. And, you know, obviously in my DAW I would clean it up a lot more, and, you know, probably work on the EQ a little bit and work on the compression. Like I said in the video, the compression, I'm overdoing it, like to give the drummer some ultramagnetic MCs. Dig that out. Honestly, it's a lesson in making a quite standard drum beat into something that really, really pumps and is just such a signature sound to that particular track. And, you know, you can do that with over compressing, shaping the sounds, shaping the ambience, shaping the room noise, reducing the dynamic range, adding some EQ. And, you know, here I've added a little bit of and I didn't actually add Air Flavor Pro in the drum beat at all. It's just literally compression, EQ, and then MP60 on the end. So there you go. I hope that's given you a little bit of insight into how I build things up. You know, it's by no means finished, and, you know, it's... yeah, it's by no means finished at all. I need to do a lot more work on the sample just to bring it out in the mix a little bit more. Mother Ducker possibly I might use on there, but because of the drum beat, it's really dynamic, it's kind of all over the place. I don't know whether Mother Ducker's really going to work on that. I kind of want the beat like that, to be honest. I want it to be grooving. But yeah, there's definitely some more work on the EQ that I would need to do on the actual loop, because it's kind of smothered and because there's so much going on in the beat. What I would probably do, actually, rather than just put a filter over the top of it like I have here, is I would probably separate. I would probably have a program just for the low end, and then I would cut the low end from kind of 180, 200 hertz completely on the other program, and just really work on the clarity and bringing out the kind of mids, the high mids and the highs. Just to, you know, I don't want it to be super clean. I want it to have that lo-fi sound, but at the moment, as things stand, it is a little bit, you know, kind of, because of the sustained chords on the Rhodes or the vibes or whatever they are going do, it's still very muddy. So it might be something that I would have to look into more, perhaps in my DAW, do a bit of surgical EQ on it. But you know, I hope this gives you a little bit of an insight into just kind of how I would start the process of building up a, you know, a lo-fi instrumental kind of hip hop beat.